everyone, it's Sue with Everyday Artisan, back again, and I'm really excited to share that I have a new project to do, a Alabama Chanin DIY swing skirt kit. I got it in the Magdalena stencil and it's pewter on top, and the kit I ordered has cream on the bottom, but I'm making some alterations. I'm going to do it on black. The reason I ended up with a new kit is I am fortunate enough to be friends with a local stitcher here in town, Maggie Stitches, shout out. And she has a stitch night once a month and gets a lot of amazing women together. There are crocheters, knitters, hand stitchers, just about every craft you could imagine. And it's a great group, and whenever I go, I usually have an Alabama Chanin project. Maggie does a lot. She's made as many, if not more, projects than I have. And we've gotten a few of the people on board to do a project, but this time we decided to encourage everyone to do what Alabama Chanin used to call their Host a Party program. And it's where everybody picks the same pattern and makes something of the same thing. I think you need at least 6 people to do it. Everybody gets their kit at 20% off, and so we all chose to do the swing skirt because it's a great starter piece. About half of the group hasn't done Alabama Chanin stitching before. So it's really exciting to be able to share this experience with some wonderful people. And we all picked skirts from the colorways that were available on the website at the time. They've since changed. I think they usually have like 8 colorways available, and so between the 11 of us, I think we all picked 5 different ones. And I've got a few people doing the same one as me, so that's kind of exciting because we'll be able to share thoughts and ideas and different techniques, how we all approach it. That's part of the fun of Alabama Chanin, is everybody kind of brings their own creativity to the project and approaches it their own way. And the kits ended up coming a lot faster than we thought. I think it only took about a week from the time that we placed our order till we got the kits in hand. So we had our first meeting. Everybody met up at Maggie's house and we distributed the kits. And a couple of the people there were new to Alabama Chanin, so a lot of questions and opportunities to learn came up, and so I wanted to kind of share with you the questions that came up that night in case you maybe have some of them of your own. Of course, the first question is always, what technique are you going to use? Are you going to use reverse applique, negative reverse, quilting, couching? I think, for the most part, our group's going to go reverse applique because it's the a more basic technique, if you will. And I actually came home, part of my decision-making process of wanting to change the color on my kit was that I don't own any additional cream fabric or have anything in my current wardrobe made out of the cream fabric. So I wanted to pick a fabric that I know I could mix and match with a lot of pieces already in my wardrobe. It would match, chose black, it would match every black pair of shoe, everything. So I came home and made a couple little swatches. I didn't even use the sampler from the kit. I like to save those for later because I like to do something with them, whether it's because it's the stenciled fabric, stenciled by Alabama Chanin. I just covet it. So for me, I'm probably going to do something else. For everyone else in my group, I would ask them to go ahead and do some testing on your sampler. And I did give everyone that came that first night little squares too. I have these little 4x4 squares left over from when I had a studio and was going to events to be able to give people an opportunity to try the Alabama technique and see if that's something they're interested in. So I did one, and I'll show them up here if I can learn how to do video on video. I did a pewter on pewter in the negative reverse. I did pewter black in negative reverse, and I did, that's the negative reverse. This is the reverse applique. So when I made these 3 tiny stitch samples, I decided I wanted to go with the plain reverse applique. Then the next thing, well here, let me tell you what came in the kit. So there were 4 panels. I've got it hanging up to kind of hang out some of my wrinkles, if you will. There are 4 panels of the skirt. On the swing skirt, all 4 panels are the exact same shape. We got 4 spools of button craft thread. In my case, it came with a slate. And elastic waistband. Mine, I'm not sure what color they call it. It kind of looks silver, which is awesome. And the stitch sampler, which is about, I would say, 6 by 8, and then a little label that you can write your name on and sew into your skirt. So the first thing was deciding what technique. In my case, I'm going to go ahead and stick with the button craft thread that was provided with the kit. My friend Maggie is going to actually do her design on the skirt using embroidery floss. You still want to use the button craft for your construction on your seams and what have you, but there's only probably about 10, maybe 12 colors of the button craft thread, and embroidery floss you can get in probably hundreds of colors. So she wanted to do something a little more colorful, so she chose that. You have to choose whether or not when you're stitching, if you around your shapes, where do you want it, on the line of the stencil? Do you want it outside the line, inside the line? And again, that depends on the technique. I find if I'm doing a negative reverse, I like to put the stitches inside on the painted area. If I'm doing the reverse applique, I like to put my stitches right on the line, the edge of the stenciled area. We had one woman who, when she got her kit, it turned out darker than she wanted. She was really trying to go something for lighter in spring, and the paint was the darker part. So, you know, she's not going to take my suggestion, but my suggestion was, hey, if you stitch just right outside the shape, you can cut away all of the painted part, and that was the darker part that you were concerned you didn't want. So I think she's going to try that on her stitch sampler and see if that's how she'd like to approach it. But then you got to decide, when you stitch around your shapes, do you want your knots on the right side of your garment, or do you want them on the wrong side? I'm not sure if you could tell. I'll do a big close-up of the bolero I'm wearing, but this one's got my knots on the outside. And the skirt I'm wearing, which is actually, I think it's a Magdalena fitted skirt in Peacock and Peacock, so tone on tone. This one I put the knots on the inside. And a lot of people don't like the knots on the inside of a garment because they, you know, can get a little itchy, but it doesn't seem to bother me. You know, and then there's like when you're starting to construct and you create your seams, how are you gonna put the seams on the inside or the outside? Are you gonna fell them to make them flat? Are you gonna open them up and do a decorative stitch in between? I did that on a panel tank, and it looks really cute because it really highlights the different seaming. You know, the panel tank I think has, is it 8 pieces? It's not 12. I think it's 8 pieces in the front and 8 pieces in the back. So the seaming is like the highlight of the shirt. So that's really cute too. I mean, even down to when you attach your waistband, which stretch stitch are you going to use? Are you going to use a cretin? Are you going to use a herringbone? There's so many decisions. And I think that's why it's one of the great parts about Alabama Chanin is it gives you so much flexibility and opportunity for creativity. But that's also why I'm excited to be doing this with another group of ladies, because it's fun to share, hey, how are you doing it? What do you think's best? So for our new ladies, we started with, you know, the physics of hand sewing. If you've read any of Natalie Chanin's books, you know that there are some certain basic fundamental things that you do. Loving your thread, which is basically pulling your thread through your fingers to release some of the tension in the thread and get some of the oil from your fingers on it so it doesn't knot up as much. There is needling your thread rather than threading your needle. Sometimes it's easier to do that, and ironically with a group of women of a certain age, shall we say. That was probably all of our biggest challenge that night, was figuring out how to needle our threads. And then there's your long thread lazy girl. So theoretically, when you take your thread off your spool, the thread length you should be creating after it's doubled should only be the length of your elbow. So you don't want to, when you pull it out, you want it this long so that when it's doubled, it's this length. That's so that when you're doing your stitching, you're actually stitching. You're not having to, every time you pull a stitch through, pull all the way through. You can just pull a little bit. And it also helps with the tension and with not getting knots in the back of your piece, because you really need to pay attention as you're pulling it through to make sure you're keeping your tension consistent and that you don't have a knot on the back, because that's fixable, but pain in the patoot. And then when we got there and then we pulled out our kits, we got started. And here was the interesting part, because Maggie and I both have very different ways to approach a project. When the pieces came out of the bags, they had been folded up, so they kind of have some fold lines on it. So I like to hang mine out for a little bit to let gravity take care of some of the lines. But then found out that she's an ironer and I'm a smoother. So, she sent an email out to the group that said, hey, let's meet and we can unpack our kits and iron and baste. And I'm like, ooh, I don't iron, I don't baste. But that's the fun. The trick with ironing is you don't ever want to pull your iron across the fabric, because the cotton jersey does stretch. So if you iron it like that, you're going to stretch it out and may not stretch it out evenly. So if you are going to iron, you want to kind of put it up and down like this. But for me, I just do a lot of this. And actually, it's important to do this at some point in the process, even if you do iron, because it binds the top and the bottom layer together so that they don't slip around so much as you're stitching. Because I'm traveling, I'm throwing my piece around, I'm in the car, it gets thrown in a bag. So it's important to try to keep the two top and bottom layers together. And that's why Maggie likes to baste. She took a piece of basting thread and threaded all throughout her panel of her skirt. And then she was teaching another woman at the event the other night just to put in little tailor tacks to keep it together. If you watch Alabama Chanin's videos on Craftsy or anything like that, you'll see that she uses straight pins and wants to pin. She likes pinning in the middle area as well, to keep the two layers from slipping apart. I don't follow what I should do. You might be able to see I have quilting clips on mine. I just clip the edges together. Again, Natalie would tell you she wants it together in the middle as well, but this works for me. I will say that on this panel, one of the questions is, hey, where do I start stitching? Do I start from the top? Do I start from the edge? Do I go in the middle and go out? How would I like to do that? Me in particular, I like to start with the bottom edge of a skirt, because that is going to be your raw edge. The sides are going to end up in a seam. The top is going to end up under a waistband, but the bottom edge is going to be your raw edge. So that's why I've pinned the bottom and the one side. I'll start along this bottom and then kind of go up this side that I've pinned and work my way over this way. You never want to, I don't know if I said this already, like stitch a little here, then stitch a little here, then stitch a little here, because there is a chance that some of the movement will cause some of the fabric to bundle up in the middle a bit. The other question we got a lot that night was, what should my stitch length be? There's no right answer. I think that there are some people who are more traditional sewers that have sewn on a machine that prefer a smaller stitch, do like 1/8 of an inch. I've never been a machine sewer, so I like 1/4 of an inch and just do a lot of running stitches because that makes it go a lot quicker. But it's definitely a matter of preference. And then there's the question, hey, do I knot off after every shape? I've got my forearm length thread, but I have a shape that's really small. So I've finished around this shape, but I've got a lot of thread left. Can I just jump over to the next shape? And that is a matter of preference. Once again, if I were buying a couture piece from Alabama Chanin and spending hundreds, possibly thousands of dollars, I would want every shape to be knotted off separately, because that does help with the stretchability of your garment. If I'm doing it, I'm probably jumping shapes. But there is a rule of thumb if you are going to jump a shape. And I do have a sample, I believe, so I'm going to come up and show you. On this shape, right here, I have a stitch right here where I jumped shapes. And the rule of thumb there is, let's see if I can show you better that way. There's a little piece of thread, you can see it. The rule of thumb is, theoretically, you don't want to be able to stick a pencil underneath the stitch. This one's probably too long for a garment, but I knew that this wasn't just on my sampler, so I didn't worry about it. But the idea is, you're going to be pulling this garment on and off. You don't want to accidentally get a ring caught in it and pull the thread, because then all of the stitches get bunched up and it messes up with the tension. So if you are going to jump a shape, make it less than a pencil length. In the negative reverse, you couldn't do it. In the reverse applique, and I didn't have to jump any shapes here, you could always just put an extra stitch between the shapes underneath the top layer of fabric, and just don't go through both layers. Just go through the bottom layer, and then you'll never see it. And actually that leads us to the next question. People were like, well, where do I start? Do I start in the middle of a shape, at the top of a shape, at the bottom of a shape? And I'm going to bring this up again. I have a tendency to start here. You want to go in at least 1/8 of an inch, or excuse me, yeah, 1/8 of an inch, because you're going to catch the part of the bottom of that in your seam if you're doing it on your edges. But look, I don't know if you can tell. On this particular one, you can see there's little threads hanging down because I started my knots right here, kind of just 1/8 of an inch from the edge. And we were talking about that the other night, and what Maggie was suggesting was starting a little higher, like maybe up 1/4 to 1/2 of an inch, and then sewing underneath the top layer, just putting a stitch or two through the bottom layer, and then bringing it down and around. And that way you wouldn't have these little edges hanging off. I'm actually going to attach a picture of a skirt I made probably about 10 years ago. Or it's this skirt. Oh, this one that I'm wearing. But you'll be able to see on the edge now, after 10 years of wearings and washings, my little knots have kind of come down, and you can see them at the edge of the skirt. Let's see how to handle the shapes on the edge. Some people were like, oh, can I cut all the way to the edge? And yes, you can. You don't need to, your bottom edge piece can have just raw areas on it. And the last one was like, you know, what do you do? Some of these shapes are so small. What do you do with those small shapes? In my case, I think I'm going to just stitch around them and not cut them. There may be some I might try to put a bead on or a sequin on or do a chain stitch rather than just a running stitch to kind of highlight them that there's something different, because this Magdalena pattern, and I'm going to bring it up to show you. It's got some really small little pieces in here. There's no way I could cut those out. The other thing I'm going to show you while I'm here is this is something I like to do that I've never heard Natalie Chanin say to do, so I don't know that it's what you should do. But before I even clip my pieces together, if I know I'm doing reverse applique, I'm going to go through and make little snips in my shapes when it's just a single layer before I put my two layers together. That way, when it does come time to cut out the centers of these pieces, it's going to be a lot easier for me to be able to get my scissors up underneath there, especially some of these skinny shapes. It's really hard to get your scissors in there. And I don't know that this prevents cutting through two layers at all. I probably do that anyway because I tend to have at least one mistake every skirt. But for me, it's really helpful, especially if I've already decided and I know I want to do the reverse applique, to go ahead and snip some of these shapes before I even put my two layers of fabric together. So those were some of the questions that were asked that night and some of my little tips and tricks. If you have any tips and tricks, please put them down in the comments below. If you have any questions, you can put them down. I don't know if I have an answer, but I've got now a group of 11 very crafty ladies I could ask. So follow along with us. Hopefully this one won't take too long. I hope to be able to wear it in Me Made May at some point. And hopefully maybe I could share a picture of 11 lovely ladies all wearing swing skirts. So thank you for joining me today. Come back soon, like, subscribe, and have a great one. Thank you.